For this video, I partnered up with MyHeritage, who provides services into family and DNA research. I have not looked much into my family tree. I know some names and where some of them were from, and that's about it. In part, it's also difficult for me. The German side of my family were from East Prussia and fled the Nazis throughout Europe, and in the process they got scattered all across Europe, and a lot of documentation was thereby lost to my family. So much of what I know about them is only rumors, and that my great-grandfather was a cavalry officer during the First World War, since I have a picture of him in uniform and his old World War I medal. On MyHeritage, the last names and birth dates are enough to get you started. You start by building a family tree where you type in the names of your relatives and the dates of births that you have. And MyHeritage can then help you verify and connect to the stories of your extended family. Because thanks to instant discoveries, MyHeritage has access to millions of documents and can thereby uncover and provide you information about your extended family that is already saved within their archives and made available to you. So even if you don't know much about your family history, MyHeritage is able to point you into the right direction and help you uncover more information about your extended family. When typing in the name of my grandmother, MyHeritage found my great-grandmother Anna Scheusengeier and great-grandfather Alois Prammer through instant discoveries, including their marriage certificate within the Catholic archives of Austria-Hungary. My great-grandparents got married in an Austrian city called Linz in 1928. I did not know that, and I did not know that parts of my family used to live in that city. The Catholic Church in Austria kept very meticulous records of marriages, baptisms, and births that go as far back as 1612. MyHeritage also automatically connected me to my great-grandmother Anna Meszycka. She was the daughter of Polish refugees that came to the Austrian Empire during the 19th century. She is the only member of that extended family that I got to know who grew up in the Austrian Empire, and she always had this weird nostalgia for it. She kept a portrait of Franz Joseph at her desk, called Hungarians a brotherly people, and used to watch these weird movies from the 1960s that depicted the Habsburg monarchy in a very nostalgic light. If you have old black and white pictures of your relatives, you can also upload them to add a face to the people in your family tree and have them digitally restored, colorized, or even animated. If you want to research and find out more about your extended family tree, sign up with MyHeritage now and get a 14-day free trial. Check out the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now. Thank you to MyHeritage for partnering up for this video. In the last video, we discussed where German bureaucracy and militarism came from and ended up at the First World War. You may want to watch that video to better follow this one. We pick up at the end of the First World War here. Post-World War I saw the emergence of a republic that nobody really wanted. The Weimar Republic, named so because its parliament had to be moved to Weimar from Berlin because of repeated coup attempts. The very word Weimar has become synonymous with political decay and decline, how democracy can wither away and collapse into itself. There are many examples often talked through as to why that is. Some may blame the punishing Versailles Treaty, others the economic crisis of 1929. I would like to, however, direct your opinion to something that is in my opinion often overlooked. The Republic was founded on an extremely dangerous precedent, when the Social Democratic government used an out-of-state right-wing death squad to massacre an attempted communist coup. There are many far-right political commentators who defend this decision, but as much as I am not a fan of communism myself, you should take a moment to think about the dangerous precedent that was set there. With this decision, the Social Democrats unwittingly legitimated political violence by out-of-state actors. In essence, the Weimar Republic was born with an act of enfranchising death squads and political murders as a legitimate means of conducting politics and undermining the state monopoly of violence. It is no surprise that the interwar Weimar Republic would be plagued with violent death squads and assassinations throughout most of its existence, because the very founding of this republic legitimated them. The unloved republic tore itself apart over questions that nobody seemed to find answers to. The crippling war debts and reparations, a perceived national humiliation through defeat, and also no plan for how to move forward. Nobody really wanted to keep the republic besides the Social Democrats. All the while, the out-of-state actors unleashed by the republic's unfortunate founding continuously undermined the state with one coup attempt after another, and it was from among the death squads that Nazism eventually emerged. What ultimately brought Nazism to power in Germany was a political alliance between the Prussian Junkers with the Nazis. They believed they could control Hitler and use the Nazis to revitalize their own militaristic institutions and to eventually rebuild the Reichsstaat. Let's take a step back. Am I blaming Prussia for the rise of Nazism? No and yes. There are many reasons the Nazis came to power. I want to make the case that the institutions of Prussia, built on militarism and moral puritanism, are among those. In the elections leading up to 1933, the Nazis had their largest successes in the regions once ruled by Prussia. The Nazis put particular effort into seizing control over the Prussian police. It was the Prussian police that were used to carry out the mass arrests after the Reichstag fire. The foundations of the SD and consequently the Gestapo were the Interior Ministry of Prussia, and the founding bricks of this notorious organization were laid by Heydrich when Göring became Minister of Prussia. After taking control of Prussian institutions, the Nazis accomplished what the Prussian monarchs could only dream of: a full and complete centralization of the state institutions with an end to regional autonomy. No more special privileges and autonomy for regions, just Gauleiters appointed by Hitler who competed with each other in who could fulfill the Nazi cause the best. The results were the worst crimes committed in human history. And I want to point out and be very clear about this. I do not believe that Prussian militarism alone is to blame for the rise of Nazism. There is never only just one reason for why something happens. But some of you may ask why I focus so much on Prussia and the role it played here. What makes me focus so much on Prussian militarism is that I believe the role that Prussian institutions of state, built by militarism and moral puritanism, played are understated and often ignored in discourse. The militarization of political engagement, the forming of militias to enact political goals. When we look at the rise of fascism in Europe, we tend to often focus on the ideology, but in terms of institutional structures, it was militarism that acted as a lubricant bringing these forces into power. This is just as true of Italy as it is of Hungary and Germany. And in the case of Germany, this was especially amplified and enabled by Prussian institutions that saw the state as a moral authority whose power ought to be used to uproot social impurity. This is why, for this video, I chose to highlight the legacies of Prussian militarism. And with that explained, we can move on to the post-war period. The end of the Second World War came with a disguised blessing for Germany: the loss of Prussia. The loss of territory may not seem as an obvious positive at first, but Prussia, in particular East Prussia, is where the Junkers had all their estates, meaning their base of power. The loss of Prussia effectively destroyed the Junker class, and that Junker class had been a cornerstone of the militaristic Prussian institutions of state. Additionally, the Western Allies decided that the Germans could not be trusted with a centralized state ever again, and instead must embrace their regionalism as the foundation of their new state. And that the Germans did. Well, at least West Germany. In the East, the Soviets had no such reservations and saw a centralized state as a great means for organizing a planned economy. The Communists inherited the bureaucratic center of what was once Prussia in Berlin, and the Communists took over these institutions to serve their purpose, and ironically, thereby really didn't manage to change much at all. A state where the bureaucrat held most power, the aristocratic estates and magnet factories were simply taken over by Communist Party bureaucrats, who now had the power that came with them. Everyone had to be blindly obedient to the state. Everything was commanded from top to bottom. The communists also disbanded the regions and turned them into smaller districts that were easier to manage from a heavily centralized state in Berlin. A militarized society with a government that did not exist to legislate, but to enforce a new type of moral puritanism. And that is what East Germany remained until its death. There's currently a lot of debate about what is wrong with East Germany, and many like to blame it as a legacy of communism, and I somewhat disagree with that. Don't get me wrong, communism sucked, but I believe German communism in many ways merely took over the institutions of Prussia and drove them into an extreme. East Germany is not the only place where this happened. Have you ever seen footage of what South Korea was like when it was still a dictatorship?
Park's leadership became a cult, and his reforms were put through with ruthless efficiency. Koreans were exhorted to go on making sacrifices, while huge sums were being invested in industry for the future.
부지런하고 자존심이 강하고 서로 협동을 해서 서로 도와서 땀을 흘려가면서 나도 잘 살고 우리 이웃도 잘 살고 우리 고장도 잘 살고 우리 나라도 살고 잘 사는 그런 사회를 만들어야 되겠다. 이것이 진짜 잘 사는 것이다.
It is striking how similar the South Korean dictatorship was to North Korea before it collapsed in 1987. An explanation for why is that the modern state institutions of Korea were created by Japanese imperialism. After World War II, new rulers took over these institutions, and while popular sovereignty is undermining them in the South, the communists in the North are still driving them into an extreme. And this is, in a way, what happened in East Germany and was overlooked at the end of the Cold War. Developing East Germany wasn't as simple as bringing markets to the East. Political development was overlooked, and that is, in my opinion, why East Germany consequently still struggles. But for now, let's return to West Germany. The West German economic miracle of the 1950s rebuilt the economy and built a reputation for Germany of being an innovative and industrious society. There are, however, some myths here. Germans pride themselves on the idea of being a liberal modern republic, but despite all the social openness, Germany is institutionally a country that is not very open to new ideas and also not very friendly to innovation. Take the car. The car was invented in Germany in 1885 by Benz, and then nothing. The first big car industries emerged in the United States and France instead. It took decades until a full-on German car industry could be established. And the reason it took so long is simple. The German economy is an economy that favors established concepts and ideas. It's an economy where much capital and government attention is mainly dedicated to preserving what exists with no disruptions. Germany is sprawling with small family businesses specializing in all sorts of integrated engineering or chemical processes, furthering a wider industry of producing products that have been established for decades or even centuries before. Yes, Germany makes great cars today, but do not forget how long it took the German economy to finally accept the car industry as something that could be part of the wider economic German framework. The German economy is incredibly slow to adapt to change and innovation. German car manufacturers lobbied against electric vehicles. 80% of German businesses still use fax machines. There is close to no German tech industry. There is no German digital innovation. There used to be a sprawling German video game industry in the early 2000s, but facing a bureaucracy unwilling to adapt to its needs, it just eroded. There is a reason why many German social media creators leave Germany. The German state and business bureaucracy is unwilling to adapt to them and force them to work under broadcasting regulations made for television in the previous century. New innovative ideas have a really hard time establishing themselves in the German economy. Germany is, was, and for the foreseeable future will continue to be lagging behind and late in the major economic innovations. It will probably take decades before a viable tech industry establishes itself in Germany. When it does, it will probably create great things, but don't hold your breath waiting for it. As centralized and big a government you may think France is, the French are still more innovative and open to new ideas than the Germans. Geopolitically, this German economic stubbornness is also an enormous weakness. Take, for example, how difficult it was to wean Germans off Russian gas imports, and that Germany was willing to put European security on the line to maintain and protect an economy hostile to change. One of West Germany's strengths, though, lies in its regionalism. Americans are sometimes surprised when I tell them that there is no German version of the IRS. That is because of the Allies, who, if you remember, did not want there to be a strong, centralized institution of state. Taxes are levied by the federal government in Germany, but taxes are not collected by the federal government, which means federal taxes are the duty of individual states to collect. This means that if a state like Bavaria does not like a certain federal tax, it can collect the revenue from elsewhere and just not enforce the tax. Germany is weird like that. It is a federal government with regional subdivisions, just like every other federal republic. It tries to find a balance between federal power and state power, just like every other federal republic. But what makes Germany unique is that state power is slightly favored over federal power in many ways. In the US, for example, states are constitutionally banned from taking on debt, while the federal government can borrow as it likes. In Germany, for a very long time, state governments could borrow as they pleased, while the federal government was constitutionally forced into always having a balanced budget, and still is. But with intensified regionalism also comes something else: Bureaucracy. A common misconception is that regional governance means less bureaucracy because you take powers from the federal government. But that is not true. Decentralized government actually always means more bureaucracy, for the same reasons as were shown with the example of the Holy Roman Empire in the previous video. If you have regional subdivisions, regional governments become invested in maintaining a strong central state, so regions cannot take advantage of each other. And when you end up with a system where states can make their individual laws autonomously, you end up with more bureaucracy to bridge the differences between states and also enforce these regional laws within a common federal system. German bureaucracy is notorious. This is not just a myth. Trust me, if you lived in Germany, no matter who you are, at several moments in your life, you have to go through this incredibly bleak, soul-crushing, sadomasochistic and humiliating experience of submitting yourself to paper for the paper god, staplers for the staple throne. When you live in Germany, you will find paper abominations like an application for an application, or be forced to do things like physically print out emails and catalogue them according to date or alphabet for your regional tax office. I'm sure many Germans can give you examples of how awful bureaucracy in Germany is. I personally think I found the best example to illustrate just how awful German bureaucracy is. People who were arrested by the Nazis for opposing the Nazis and sent to jail as political prisoners were sometimes not released from jail until 1958, a full 13 years after the Nazis were defeated, because the bureaucratic paper mills took so long to facilitate those releases. One of the worst legacies of German political development in this regard is the authority of the clerks it inherited from Prussia. I am sure every German watching this can tell you a story of some particular nasty office clerk at some state office who tortured them with endless demands of different formats and signature types, pens to use or not to use, applications for application forms, or other things that make no sense and seem to solely exist for the sadistic bemusement of a professional group of lawyers specialized in navigating the labyrinthian maze of the paper god's realm. But what Germans get in exchange for this paper hell, autonomy and powers in regional politics, to an extent that most American state legislators can probably only dream of. German states have far-ranging autonomy in political and fiscal matters. States can build large public service infrastructure. German states can legislate silly cultural nonsense, such as left-leaning states and right-leaning states legislating how many pronouns and how many genders there are. Some states have taken advantage of this autonomy through decades of good policy decisions to become prosperous places with effective governance, chief among them being Bavaria. Other states have failed to do so. Chief among the failures, ironically, is the capital city of Berlin. And in this regard, it has to be said that most Germans are hypocrites. They like to complain about the bureaucracy, but they enjoy the fruits of state autonomy that this bureaucracy comes with. Right-wing Germans like to moan and complain about the kleptocratic immigration process, where it takes years to have a foreigner deported. Well, the reason the system is so slow is because each state can define its own immigration standards. Left-wing Germans like to moan and complain about the constitutional requirement for a balanced federal budget. Well, but you kind of do enjoy the fiscal autonomy and policy that all regions, including left-leaning ones, have. There's also a danger to this paper mess that I believe Germans should consider and talk about a little more. Specifically, that German bureaucracy can act as a state within a state and actually be used as a means to kill policy. We particularly started seeing this during the Merkel era. Remember the promise of a green energy transition? What happened to that? Well, basically, if you don't like a policy in Germany and you can afford to hire the shamans of the paper god, meaning the lawyers who specialize in understanding the intricate networks of paperwork between federal and state governments, you can then swamp a policy with endless paperwork, endless requests for viability studies under an endless amount of region-specific variables that can endlessly change depending on the circumstantial interplay between federal and state law. That's what befell the green energy reform. It was buried and drowned in paper. Basically, in Germany, you can take a policy that was popular, passed and was signed by all chambers of government, and you can still stop it by drowning it to death under an increasing mountain of unnecessary, bureaucratically dreamt up nonsense pile made of paper. The Ukrainians in the audience are by now probably also familiar with the legal German paper quicksand, because Scholz has throughout the last years continuously tried to drown approvals of weapon systems to Ukraine in it. And that fact that you can kill a policy not for legal or constitutional reasons, not for reasons of public accountability or because people did not vote for it, but simply because you can afford the power to drown it in paper, that is, in my humble opinion, potentially somewhat dangerous and a potential threat to the health of German democracy down the road. Eventually in the future, Germany may be able to slim down its bureaucracy through digitalizing the state, assuming that the application for the application for the application for the application to digitalize the state does itself not get lost in the paper mountains. But if it really wants to substantially cut down the bureaucracy of the state, it will have to become more like the United States and begin stripping states of special privileges to treat them all as equals, meaning shifting the balance of powers more in favor of the federal government. For the time being, though, the German state remains an intricate labyrinth of paperwork designed to create a balance of powers between regional autonomy and federal authority, which tips in favor of regional autonomy, thereby creating the notoriously labyrinthian German bureaucracy. Thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Do not forget to check out their link in the description or to scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you want to join the conversation on this video, don't forget to join the Discord server. I know I have been on a very long break due to things that happened to me offline. I don't really like sharing what happens to me in my private life offline, but be assured, unless there should be anything unforeseen happening to me in the next few months or weeks, you should know that I will be back at making regular content again. See you again soon.